Hey folks, and welcome to the Counter Clipping Show for the very auspicious Ides of March 2022. So auspicious for a bunch of reasons, actually, but we'll get into all that as we go along. A whole bunch of more or less random stuff to talk about today, but as you can see, the shipment from GMT has arrived, and I am officially clipping Pacific War is what we've decided to start with, because that is the one that is on our short list of things that is getting to the table sometime in the next couple of months. There's going to be unboxing videos for all this stuff, and we'll talk about all of it as time goes on here this evening. However, in addition to clipping Pacific War, we are drinking Tamnavulin, which I forgot to put a little bit of water in, so let's actually take care of that. Tamnavulin double cask, which is pretty good, and very affordable if you hadn't known. So I kind of hoped to get this started a little earlier, but between work and other stuff, just didn't happen until literally like half an hour ago, maybe. Everything is clipping no problemo, and everything looks good. So you can see the other 4 titles that showed up today as well. It is the literal mother load, and I don't trust UPS, and it was coming UPS, and I'm like, oh, you can track the truck. And I'm like, the truck ain't moving, man. It's like been 4 hours, and the truck hasn't moved from the hub. What's going on? And then the stuff showed up at the on the doorstep. So I guess we don't care too much. You know, I was like sitting here sweating it out, watching people. Oh, look, I got mine. I live in Buhabu, Indonesia. And I'm like, what the fuck, man? I don't got mine. I got in Ohio. And I'm trying not to be a giant bitch about it. It finally showed up today. So we're all good. Everything looks great. We'll talk about all the some general observations. There'll be unboxing videos on all that. So the official topic, though, is how to approach big monster war games, because this is something that's going to come up again at Buckeye Game Fest when we try and teach people how to play OCS. And in addition to that, you know, it's something that the Players Aid mentioned in a video that they released either today or yesterday or in the last couple of days, where they mentioned that they can't really get into the big games because they don't have the time or the space or whatever. And I'm here to tell you that excuse will not be accepted. So we'll talk about that some more as well, and I'll try and provide some easier on-ramps for big war games. So before we go into that, it looks like somebody commented, but not the first person. So we've got in the chat this evening so far, if we're having any kind of streaming problems, hitching or buffering or anything like that, please let me know. I will be, by the way, we'll talk about that in a minute. So first of all, I want to say hello to Charles Latour, Terrence Bonham, John Longshore, Husa Maldonado, Todd Walser, Manders, Chad Kennedy, Carl Crater from the Wargame Bootcamp, Dale Brady, Stigler, Jason W. John Clark, Mike Anthony, did I get, nope, John Harden, Iggy Cricktal, Jeff Beeler, Doug Sunseth is in the house, James Whitmer, Marty Sample, Christopher Prest. Thanks very much, Christopher, for sending me this copy of Star Trader, which I very much appreciate. This is going, I'm going to check it out, clip the corners, and then it's going to go in with my other universe stuff. But I'm going to, of course, you know, try and leverage it for Traveler, of course. So thank you so much for that. Rob Johnson, Daniel Silverthorne, Bill Simone, Rudy Armendariz, I think I got that right. Feel free to correct me. David Imperato, Brent McCabe, Palelu99, welcome to the live stream. Mark Hodgkinson, Rick Cox, Deck B, the Command Tent, Bayonet Brandt is in the house, Henry Sikorsky, SW, William Bird, Vincenzo Beretta, William Aarons, who we missing here? Jeffrey Wesovich, Achilles. There's a lot of people here already. Joel, Peter Bergs, if I haven't gotten to you yet, Matt Taylor, Stephen Roberts, Kevin Paulson from East Texas, Grumbling Grog Yard, Hexy from Hex to Hex is here, Kyle Reese is here. Hopefully I got everybody. After filming the 5 unboxing videos, my voice might end up being just a wee bit rough this evening. So, oh, and Fucko. Let's say hello to Fucko, who was first in the list, but there's reasons why I can't say his name that have to do with monetization. It's too early in the video. Now we should be fine. So everything has arrived. I will remind everyone, just in case we forget to mention this again later, that next Monday's counter clipping show is not happening on Monday. It is happening on Friday. So not this Friday, but the following Friday. So the next counter clipping show will be on Friday the 25th, and then we'll have another one on Monday the 28th, and we'll be back to the regular schedule. I will be in the lovely city of Seattle, Washington for a few days. My wife and I are going out there for our anniversary. So if anybody has any fun gaming-related things to do in Seattle, let me know, because it looks like I'm going to have at least half a day of horsing around on my own in Seattle. A little bit of a long story on that. I'll also give you I realize that nobody is here for technical advice. At least I hope not, but I'm going to give you some anyway. I upgraded to Windows 11. Don't do that. It is, unless there's like some specific Windows 11 feature of which I am unaware that you find particularly necessary, don't do that. It brings nothing new to the table and removes a bunch of functionality that I was using, like the ability to customize your own start menu. And I mean, you can still sort of customize your own start menu. It just sucks now. So best avoid it as long as you can. Now, let's talk about a couple of things related to. Let's see if I can get. I didn't give you an in the house today, Stigler. I apologize. You know, sometimes when I say that, you're not here yet. So, although you almost always make it. So, I did fill the gas tank up. It cost about $54 the other day. So there's that. So one of the idiosyncrasies of Pacific War here is that there's carrier-capable air and not carrier-capable air, and you have to read the unit designations to figure out which one is which. That seems like an easy problem to have fixed, but, you know, whatever. It's you know, something I can live with. John Longshore's wife's new computer came with Windows 11. Yeah, I mean, the fact that they moved the icons to the middle of the taskbar is like, all right, but you can easily enough figure out how to move them back over to the left. What irritated me is that there's extra clicks now. Microsoft loves clicking. So there's extra clicks now involved in changing my sound device, which I do all the time, right? Because I've got headphones and I've got a speaker, and sometimes I don't want to wear the headphones, so I put the speaker on. And I like to be able to switch between the two sound devices, and it's just an extra couple of clicks now to do it. You used to be able to like set up your own little groups in the start menu so I could keep my desktop nice and tidy. Not anymore. You can have, there's one group. You can your stuff can either be pinned to the start menu or not. And you can't customize the space. You can't make any changes to it at all. It is not great, to say the least. Used to be able to change the size of the start menu. Nope, not anymore. Took all that away. So I gotta, you know, is this a world-ending catastrophe? Not really. You can roll it back to Windows 10, but the easiest way to do that I've seen is to revert to a clean installation of Windows 10, which is something that you probably ought to think about doing every once in a while, but I really don't feel like dealing with it right now. So we're not doing it right now. So anyway, there's that. Don't Windows 11. It is not worth anybody's aggravation. Speaking of Star Trek, which has been mentioned in the chat, I've been watching season 3 of Star Trek Discovery. Boy, it's not that good. There's like some good work in it and a lot of really sloppy writing. I'm not all the way through it yet. We'll see. I'm trying to force my way through it. Jeff Beeler asks the perennial question, what is the definition of a monster wargame? Well, my definition of a monster wargame is if I say it's a monster, then it's a monster. If that sounds incredibly arbitrary, then it kind of is. But I'll also recognize that there are edge cases, right? I think nobody's going to argue that Atlantic Wall right here is a monster, right? I'm having trouble. This Atlantic Wall is a monster. It definitely is. But is the Dark Valley a monster? Yeah, I kind of think it is, actually. I think it takes long enough to play, and I think it's a confluence of factors. So it's not strictly semantic, but at the same time, there isn't necessarily a hard and fast line that says it has to, if it's over this many counters or this many maps or this many hours, then it's a monster game. You'd have to come up with a complicated equation to make that work. Thomas Bandy from Oberlin, Ohio. I haven't been through Oberlin in a while myself. Peterburg's got a bunch of model railroad freight car kits, so that that's a thing that I have managed. It's a hobby I've managed to avoid getting into. One of our local guys is, in fact, a model railroad fella as well. Jeff Peeler says that Seattle has the Science Fiction Museum and Hall of Fame. I've actually been to that last time we were in Seattle. Good call, though. That is a good call. And I've been to Pike Place Market, too, and I know everybody likes Pike Place Market, but it's a bit of a tourist trap at this point. John Tsai from the sunny Philippines. Daylight savings time. Damn Ben Franklin anyway and his harebrained ideas. So I've been pretty well served by Windows 10. I've been, generally speaking, hasn't been frustration free, but I've generally speaking been reasonably happy with it. But yeah, the rest of it's like, I could live without it. Yeah, this is another one of those things where the UI is literally changed for no reason whatsoever. So, Chad Kennedy, our next game on the list, which is likely to be 3 to 4 weeks away, is Pacific War. So, tasty. Yeah, I watched the first episode of the first new episode of Picard too, and was like, cool that Q's in there, but fan service aside, I don't know. So. We will see. So I think I have an counter-organization scheme that'll work for Pacific War. So I've never played anything but the smallest engagement scenarios. I think I played Savo Island and Pearl Harbor, and they took me a long time to set up. Now this was with the older game. Now my old Pacific War is organized into 3 counter trays. And that's a huge part of the reason why it took that long, because that's what fits in the box, right? You can't fit more than that in there. At 11 counter sheets, my expectation, or 10 counter sheets, I should say. I'm not sure where I got 11 from. My expectation is that I will need at least 4 and more likely 5 counter trays to store and organize this game. So I think that means what we're looking at is an outside-the-box storage solution. That is undesirable, but there's enough room. You'll see it in the unboxing video, because I did this with all the new arrivals. There's enough room for 2 counter trays in the box when you take the counter sheets out. So, Mike Anthony, that's actually a great definition. But at the same time, we've got 2 to 3 monsters in rotation, sometimes even 4, at any given time over here. So, can you do tours of the aircraft carriers over at the naval base? That's what I'm wondering, because I'd be all over that if we could do that. There's also the Seattle Underground tour, which looks neat. I think I have studied the rules. While not comfortable with it, I believe I have studied the rules to a sufficient degree that I'm comfortable doing the organizing at this point. I've set up enough scenarios and struggled with that to understand, I think, where the frustrations are, which is not to say that I won't organize everything and then play several campaign scenarios and then reorganize it. That could totally happen. That is a thing that has happened. Now, something I'm going to point out, and I did not... This kind of registered, but I was incurious, so I didn't measure it, and I didn't say anything until after I finished the unboxing videos. In each of these 3 cases, in the unboxing videos, I'm going to say that they're 3-inch boxes, and they're not. They're 2.5-inch boxes. That's super weird. GMT has done relatively few. There's a couple of coin games and maybe a couple other things that are in 2.5-inch boxes, but Very unusual. Nevertheless, of all 5 of these games, I think the only one that I'm really concerned about getting it all, or not getting it all back in the box when organized, is maybe Vietnam. And obviously Pacific War, which there's no hope. So Ed Holtzman, game with the most punch boards. Stellar, yeah, but some of those are, you literally punch Jupiter out and you're done for that sheet. So I don't think that really counts. That is just my perspective on that. The box is damn heavy. It is pretty close to actually 10 pounds. The second box, Charles Latora. I'm not sure what you're talking about here. I mean, I could just call GMT and say, hey, send me a second Pacific War box. And maybe I'll end up doing that. That's not a terrible idea. They'll probably sell me an empty box. Salerno is an 1.5-inch box. It's in the same size box that most of the Mark Simonich games end up in. And if you didn't buy the mounted map, which I didn't for this reason, it's going to fit just fine. And it's a 1 counter sheet game. It'll go in. It'll go very comfortably in 1 counter tray. So I wouldn't say the box is too big for it, but certainly because if you put the mounted map in there, it won't fit with a counter tray. If you can put 1 counter tray in there and it'll be very comfortable, and I am going to be very happy with it. And it is going to Buckeye Game Fest, which starts again. War Room opens on April 4th. I think the hotel block might be closed, but you might be able to make calls and squeal about that, and they'll let you in. I'm not sure. Event registration is open, and we do have some open events. So there's going to be coin teach and plays. There's available slots for those. There's going to be OCS boot camps. There's open slots for that. And rather shockingly, there's going to be open slots for a Forgotten Battles playtest. So if you're into Forgotten Battles, we're going to be starting Monday. Show up, and we will put you to work. I am not playing in that game, incidentally. I am running the OCS boot camps. I committed to that before it was clear to me that we were going to have an opportunity to do Forgotten Battles. So now I did mention, I'll talk about this too, because the answer, Chad, is no, not yet. I talked about doing a matte finish on some of these counters, and I haven't done it with Pacific War. Let me put it there, because I knew I gotta get started, man. We're gonna play this in 3 weeks. So the stuff that was recommended to me is a Krylon. Is a Rust-Oleum matte finish. Hold on a second. I don't know where that went. It's in my phone. I don't know where my phone is. It's a Krylon matte finish. I will report back on how that works out. I don't know how that's going to work out. I have heard reports of people having problems varnishing their counters. We did not do that with these. These feel like sort of satiny anyway, so I was real happy with the way the look and feel of this whole package, to be honest about it. I'm hearing a couple people say they got War for America in. That's one I am quite excited about. Do check out the Kickstarter preview from yesterday, although it was supposed to release today, and an incompetent clown that was in charge managed to misschedule it for yesterday. Barbarians at the Gates from Compass. That's up on Kickstarter now. You can get the pre-order price still. It looks pretty good, actually. I was not incredibly chuffed about it, and then I looked at it, I'm like, this looks like a real solid CDG type of point-to-point design. This actually looks pretty good. So the whole thing, the storage solution is going to depend. Right now I'm just using counter trays. The storage solution long term is going to depend on how many counter trays it takes. If it does end up being 5 counter trays, then I'm probably just going to order another Pacific War box from GMT, although I probably ought to get on that too. If it's 4 counter trays, then maybe I'll get a blank box, because I can get 4 counter trays in a 3-inch box. Brant got his copy of Zermatt from Catastrophe Games. That's a pretty interesting looking design from somebody that was involved in that conflict. So that is actually why that is interesting. Husa says he's never played any of the 4X games. I mean, I don't want to use the term 4X because that means something different, but I was actually calling that the Mark Simonich apostrophe series at one point. Lately, I've called it the Simonich operational series. It's also known as the Zachbond series. But the next game that I think he's got coming out is North Africa 41, which does not have Zachbonds. So it's a redo of his Legend Begins, I believe. I don't want to use a tackle box, and I generally speaking strongly dislike storing counters outside the box. I mean, sometimes you just stuck with that though, right? I don't have any of those blank GMT boxes. So I'm curious to experiment with the counter varnishing idea. So our buddy whose place we play OCS at varnished his third winter counters, and they actually do feel really nice. I'm very happy with the way those look and feel. It would be even better if he had not sawed half the counters in half with his rotary cutter trying to cut them out of the sheet. But you know, I was not I was not listened to. Let me put it that way. So, Alan Salazar invested in Der Weltkrieg. Yeah, it's a lot, but it does go on sale about once a year from Decision. You can get them from Decision, and I frankly suspect you could get them for a discount elsewhere, too. I think I've told the story before. I actually walked up to Doc at Origins and said, I'd like to buy the entire Der Weltkrieg series. Will you give me a discount? And he said, yes. And he did. So I was real happy with that. Yeah, Marty mentions that the Simonich, that isn't really a series so much as it is a related family of games with mostly similar mechanics, but they are all a little different. There's no like series rulebook or anything like that. So that's actually true, and I'm not sure I mentioned that in this particular unboxing video. Of the 5 unboxings, I have 3 of them filmed, edited, and uploaded. The Pacific War one total with filming and editing and all that took like an hour and a half. Varnishing counters, you lay them out, you spray the varnish on, several thin coats. So, Husa says the thing with him with monster games is scheduling. So, I've talked about this before. So I'll mention it again. The reason why I one thing that one observation I've made about myself as a guy who plays monster games is that to me it feels very natural as a role-playing player to show up for a game every week and play for a while and then come back the following week and pick up where you left off. So to me that doesn't feel weird, but I suspect that to a lot of wargamers it does. The big difference, of course, is that you have to leave it set up, unless you're using Vassal, in which case you have other options, but that's the thing we'll talk about in a bit. So there are a couple of U.S. Army planes here, and I don't know what they are, but they have a different color background than the rest of the U.S. Army planes. And they're not the long-range air, and I'm not sure what they are. Brant, I sent you an email earlier, just an hour or 2 ago. So you've got your infos. Justiguard says he says that the Salerno mounted maps will fit in the maps with a counter tray. And the box is not the same width as most GMT games, so you have to shove it in there. That's plausible too. Yeah, I don't know. It'll be real close. It really is a pretty small game, to be honest. And the map's not as big as a standard map either. Yeah, there we go. And don't forget Vassal, right? You know, you got the opportunity for a lot of monster games to just set it up and start playing. And it's a great way to learn the game. If you make a mistake and you're playing yourself on Vassal, who cares? You just keep playing. Look up stuff as you go. That's my preferred way to learn games anyway. That's damn well what we're going to do with Pacific War. So, Strelnikov, first of all, welcome back to the stream, wants to take on Ukraine 43 because of current events. So, yeah, so that's also true of Third Winter, right? It takes place over more or less the same ground, as more or less, as well. It's not really quite true, but, you know, it's Ukraine, at least. So there's that. They might be the Flying Tigers. They're not the right planes, though. At least the silhouette's not the right planes. They're marked 6 NFS and 419 NFS. And they're twin engine. They're fighters, but they're twin engine planes. At least what the silhouette is. So they don't look like the Flying Tigers. Let me put it that way. Not saying they're not, but they don't look like it. Doug says he would use a matte fixative on the unpunched counter sheets rather than something labeled as a varnish. Well, like I said, the only ones I've handled are this Rust-Oleum stuff, and it is labeled as a varnish, and I like the result. Now, it was multiple thin coats. You know, you don't want to just dump it on there. So that's generally speaking true. Night Fighter squadrons. That's Black Widows is possible. That is possible. I'm not good enough to recognize the plane by its silhouette. But they're not P-51s, I know that. P-61 Night Fighter, that's possible. And there's about 4 of those too. So, but I couldn't find, at a glance anyway, I couldn't find anywhere in the rules that was defined. Doesn't mean it's not there, it just means I didn't see it. I suspect it's in there. Now, the rules for this are available on GMT's website, but not the scenario book, not the example of play. So, I know that this is an unpopular opinion, but I am going to lean in the direction that Stigler is staking out right now and saying that, you know, I'm perfectly happy to have paper maps that I put under Plexi, generally speaking. Are mounted maps nice? Sure. They absolutely are. But they also create storage headaches where you might not otherwise have a storage headache. So, now I'm hearing that some people have issues with a varnish type spray on counters turning sticky after a while, perhaps with the introduction of either heat or humidity. And I haven't seen, haven't handled enough of those to say whether I think that's a big problem or not. Whatever game I spray, I want it to be a game that is going to get played, right? So, because that's why I'm bothering. So I think it might end up being Salerno 43, because I know that's going to get played. It's also one counter sheet, which will make it easy to do. So there's that. These are twin-tail planes, so they'd be Black Widows. I think if that's what they are, they're going to be Black Widows. Mark McNair mentions he puts Plexi on his mounted maps too because they often don't lay flat. Yep, that completely echoes my experience. So, Mark Hodgkinson, after playing the small scenarios of Third Winter, he's trying scenario 1. He had to make a table of the OOB and make plans for each. Yeah, that sounds awesome, actually. I love doing stuff like that as part of Wargames. I think there is probably something to the notion that our desire for mounted maps may stem from expectations given to us by Avalon Hill, which for a long time everything that they did was mounted. Now there was a point at which they stopped mounting certain games, right? Great campaigns of the American Civil War were never mounted. In fact, any game with multiple maps in the same box, multiple full-size pieces in the same box, was not mounted, except for The Longest Day, which was its own kind of thing, I suppose. But Empires in Arms was not mounted that they did. None of the great campaigns of the American Civil War games had mounted maps. Even Stonewall's Last Battle, which is a single map game, boy, thinking about it, it would have been pretty neat to have a mounted version of that, right? On the other hand, one of the reasons I have the extra copies of all those is so that I can one day do something nice with the maps. And I had to put them on a wall in mind, but, you know, you can, I guess you could, there's probably a how-to on how to mount your own maps, I suppose. So very briefly, the other three things that showed up. So Vietnam 65 to 75, where, you know, as of right now, that's still like the definitive Vietnam game, right? At the high levels, operational or strategic level, it's still the definitive simulation. Let's put it that way. Certainly, there's going to be people who prefer to play Fire in the Lake or Hearts and Minds or whatever, and that's fine. But boy, it doesn't have nearly the simulation value of that thing. Now, I've only played scenarios. There's a whole lot of campaign there too. Someday, I hope to play the campaign game. Guthwolf, I actually did. Thanks. First of all, welcome to the stream. Anybody that hasn't, by the way, thumbs up the video and subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. I have actually done that already, but right now the problem with doing that is that I've got two places where shelving lives. One is right behind me, and the other one is downstairs in the living room. And the stuff in the living room is kind of not organized. Particularly, there's kind of books here and games here and RPG stuff here, and I can't really go through it. And the other place where the games are is over here, where they are all in those office boxes. So there's a lot of games in those office boxes yet. So at some point, I would love to do that. But right now, the organization is not where it needs to be to make that anything other than an embarrassing fiasco. I prefer plexi to be as thin as possible. My favored plexi is probably 2 mils, something like that. 1.5 or 2 mils. So the Vietnam 65 to 75, I think there's a chance. I think it's 6 counter sheets, 5 or 6 counter sheets. I think there's a chance I can get all that in the box. The other 3 games, I absolutely know that I can. Barbarossa Army Group Center, I think, fits 2 counter trays comfortably. I think I can get the game in that. Into the Woods fits 3 counter trays comfortably, even though it's only a 2.5-inch box. I can absolutely get that and the markers in 3 counter trays. That is not going to be a problem at all. And that looks really nice. I'm very pleased. We can thank our own Stigler here for his assistance in helping with that. I will also mention that thanks to Stigler, there is already a Vassal module available on the Vassal website for Into the Woods, so check that out. There is also a Salerno 43 and a Vietnam 65 to 75 GMT edition Vassal modules already. I believe there is one in the works for Army Group Center, and for Pacific War, I actually don't know. I have not seen confirmation from somebody that said, yes, I'm working on that. Cat-proof monster. Well, yeah, run it on Vassal or have your own room for it, you know. So as Michael Kirk mentions, the sort of floaty feet thing that does happen if your plexi is too thick doesn't bother me so much, but the weird lensing effect that you get with really thick plexi does. So I prefer to have plexi as thin as possible. Now, you know, it can bow a little more, but there's ways to fix that. It can also break more easily if it's thinner. That is a thing that you sometimes have to worry about, and I've broken sheets of plexi before. Jeff Beeler, I have often, if you actually watch my old videos on the playthrough of where Eagles Fight, where Eagles Fight, is that what it's called? The Ted Racer 1914 and 1918 East Front World War I game. I actually use that technique of writing on the plexi. I don't normally, if I'm playing at somebody else's place, because I don't normally have like the dry erase markers ready to go and that kind of stuff. But if I'm like doing it here, yeah, I'll totally do that. I don't use grease pencils. I use dry erase, but John Stanley, I picked up some samples, actually ordered some industrial samples of anti-glare plexi and was pretty unimpressed with it. So if somebody has a specific recommendation for the specific anti-glare plexi, I will be happy to take a look at it. But the stuff I've seen so far has left me somewhat unimpressed. So the interesting thing is that the carrier error and the non-carrier error has exactly the same statistics. And as far as I can tell, the only difference is that you can't like reorganize them together. When Eagles Fight. Yeah, that's it. That's a good game, too, by the way. And my playthrough I made an enormous number of errors in that playthrough. But it was fun nevertheless. Monster Wargames pre-World War One. There are some. War Between the States is definitely a monster. To what extent it is worth your time is a bit of another question. You might consider a Mighty Fortress to be a monster. I'm not sure how long that takes to play. I would be inclined to not call it a monster. Chad Kennedy mentions the different colored tile separators. We'll eventually have a video about that. I use the little plastic blocks. I get Plexi just at Lowe's, personally. Justigard says Imperium Romanum. I had people arguing with me about that. There are some... So, Imperium Romanum is not... I don't think it's a true monster. However, there are some scenarios in there, because there's no campaign game, right? There were rumors of a campaign game for years, and that never materialized. Can you imagine that the 800-year campaign game with monthly turns? That would be awesome. So that didn't happen. But some of those scenarios are fairly lengthy, and might reach into monster-y territory. I'm not sure if they quite make it, but I think... I wouldn't argue with the with putting it in that category. Let me put it that way. But if by monster you're going into it expecting that there's going to be a 1,000-year campaign game, then you don't have that. That's not what it's about. Mike Anthony says Mighty Fortress can be finished in 6 to 8 hours, so I would definitely say no to that. For Here I Stand takes longer than that. Siege of Jerusalem, yeah, that's a monster. Alicia too, possibly. The Avalon Hill Alicia, at least. And maybe the GBOH one as well. Marty is playtesting Winter's Victory. He's mentioning that every week, so I believe he is now bragging, which I can't really blame him. So it's not like I didn't do that for Forgotten Battles. Winter's Victory looks pretty neat. There are also, in terms of pre-World War I monsters, there's always Labatt. So this becomes a little bit confusing because there's a bunch of games that are not part of the Labatai series that have Labatai in the name. Those ones from Legion Wargames or Preston Editions or somebody like that are the ones I'm thinking of. And somebody is doing some video on that right now. I forget who. Sorry about that. And... We're doing this in Carrier first. But the true Labatai series is all monster. Well, there's actually a couple of small ones, but those are very much the exception. Generally speaking, they're big Napoleonic monster games at the battalion level. If that sounds absurd, it is in fact absurd. So, and I think we're not going to talk about this tonight, but I'll mention the subject because I might do it as an actual video topic at a later time, is looking at the evolution of the Labatai series, which originated out of GDW in the very early 70s, and the Europa series, which originated from GDW in the very early 70s, and how differently the two families of games evolved. Yeah, I'm not sure what was the first monster game. Was Labatai de la Moscova from GDW, not DNO. I think Labatai came out first. I think, but it is one of those two. All right, I think we're now going to the. Oh, what are we doing? I got sheets 1 through 3 here. I guess we'll just start with counter sheet 1 because why not? And we're looking at the U.S. Army land-based air. Okay. Okay. That 30 Years Wargame, I don't know how monstery it is, but that 30 Years Wargame that GMT has on pre-order right now looks very attractive. I haven't ordered it at this time, but I just got severely reamed by GMT in the last couple of months. So if I don't want to throw them another pile of money, right this minute, then that's why. But there's a good chance I'm going to end up getting in on that. I got to tell you. Jeff Beeler asks, was Richard Berg the most prolific monster game designer on the planet? I doubt it. I think Dean Essig was the most prolific monster game designer on the planet. Not that Richard Berg didn't have several, but Dean did several families of them, all of which are basically monster games. So I think if there's a king of how many monster games they did, I think it's Dean rather than Dan Berg. How many P-39 counters? I don't know, and they're not, the counters are not designated that way. They're not designated by individual aircraft type. So the Labatai games were designed by a variety of different designers, though. Those are not, there's not like one name attached to those. That's the big difference there. Red Sash Games combine Turkenkrieg and Heirs for the Golden Throne. Yeah, those are not titles I'm familiar with. So the combined Deathrite Curse is probably the biggest monster war game that exists. I haven't seen it in person. I've seen pictures of it, and it is lunatic big. So Jeff Beeler says, who was or is the best monster war game designer? That's easy. Dean Essig. Can think of nobody else that designed as many highly playable monsters as Dean. Now, you or anybody else may or may not have a preference toward Dean's designs, and that's completely fine and up to you. But I think if you're asking me, and you are, I think Dean is my easy answer to that question. Not that there's not plenty of other good monster games too, but it is a Mark. So do we call? Now I've never played Gulf Strike, so I'm relying on you folks to tell me. Do we call Gulf Strike a monster? Jason Peterson, welcome back. Jason W., we probably did talk about monster games, but, I don't know that we've asked this specific question. But, yeah, it's fair to say we talk about monster games on this channel a reasonable amount. In this case, what the impetus for the question is the fact that this whole huge truckload of stuff from GMT just showed up, and 4 of the 5 things in it are monster games. So the least monstery, other than Salerno, obviously, is going to be Into the Woods. Jeff Beeler, Avalon Hills Jutland is an early monster war game. I don't have that impression. I'm willing. I've never played Jutland. I'm willing to be corrected on that. How long does it take to play? Because if you could play it in an afternoon, then I don't think it's a monster game. Even if it takes up an entire gymnasium floor, which it does. Do I have any oh, yes, I do. I'm going to have to pay closer attention to this. Because now we got the differences between the fighters, the tacticals, and the bombers. So in the original, you basically had 1 engine planes, 2 engine planes, and 4 engine planes. And those really aren't real distinct, right? So some of those single engine planes, some of those things that were intended to be represented with single engine plane counters actually had 2 engines. So So they got redesignated in this edition as fighters, tacticals, and bombers, which I think is more accurate. But it, there's still there's still edge cases where they don't necessarily fit in those categories. Stigler says he wouldn't count time to play as a monster, and that to me is the most important criteria. If you could play it in an afternoon, I don't think it's a monster game. It might be big, might be real big, but like Jutland. John Sy asked about 3 Days of Gettysburg. Yeah, I'd call that a monster. That's a 3 mapper, and it takes quite a while. Let me put it that way. Now, I also don't think that, to my mind, that complexity makes a game a monster or not. There are monstrously complicated ASL scenarios that are not monster games that you can play in 3 hours and which could fit on a card table easily. So I don't think there's any way you call those monsters, but the complexity might be really, really high. Triumph of Chaos is probably close. It's a big 2-map game. I don't think it takes that long, but it definitely takes longer to play than Paths of Glory, which it's based on. Alan Salazar asked about Proud Monster. Yeah, I'd say Proud Monster's a real monster. John Longshore, is there a Roman Empire monster? I think the closest thing that we have to that is probably we'll see when Thunderbolt comes out. That's gonna be in, I think, inching into that territory. The examples I can think of are examples that I talk about a lot when asked about ancient war games. Imperium Romanum and the Ancient World series from Richard Berg and GMT. And in both of those cases, I think they don't really fit the monster definition, but they're the ones that I can think of. World War I monsters, there's plenty of. There's Offhand, there's Le Grand Guerre, there's Balance of Powers, there's hell. I mean, you could call, based on the amount of time it takes to play, you could call Guns of August a monster. So a Storm of Steel, the decision game Storm of Steel. So I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot available in the World War I space. Civil War, there's quite a bit too, but a lot of them are tactical, right? And a lot of them are either one-offs or are part of one of those 2 big series of regimental level Civil War games, Great Battles of the American Civil War or Line of Battle. There's a couple games that are the same scale that aren't in those 2 series, probably more than a couple actually. But those are where a lot of those big, and by Line of Battle I also mean the earlier regimental subseries. Any Europa game is a monster with the exception of Case White, Narvik, and Balkan Front or Marina Mercure. And probably Western Desert. Edelweiss, totally a monster. Jeff Beeler, I do not remember a Roman Empire module for War in Europe. That would be even more absurd than the World War I module that they actually did. Doug Sun says, how big is big? Good question. My definition tends to be 2 maps at a minimum. But again, if a game's got 1 map, and we'll circle back to whether Pacific War is a monster game or not, because it's another one of those yes, but type of situations. 800 counters is only like 3.5 counter sheets. I don't think it's that many counter sheets. I've got tons of games with more counters than that. So, I mean, in my opinion, I think if it's got 2 maps, it might be a monster. Or it might not. Ardennes 44. Is that a monster? That's 2 maps. I think you could play that in 2 days of a convention. I don't think. What scale is the Manassas game First Blood at? Is what I would ask. Because if there was a There was a Richard Berg game by that name, I think, and if that may have been one of the like the middle, where it was like Conflict Simulations or somebody like that produced that in the first version of Dead of Winter. And if that's the game we're talking about, then that's Great Battles of the American Civil War. Some of the ASL historicals are totally monsters too. That's absolutely true. Well, there's a crap ton of U.S. Army fighters, like a crap ton, to the point where I think I'm going to need more than one compartment for them. Let's do the long range air. So these counters have sort of a bit of an interesting satiny type finish that I'm finding both interesting and very attractive. The other clipping project that I've been doing is actually Under an Iron Sky, which also has sort of satin finish counters, which I really liked. So now, you know what? When you're asked, what's the definition of a monster game? What I have to say about it is really not that important. Okay, what is more important is if you're the potential player, what do you think it is? Is it a monster game or not? That's more important than what I think, because I'm not playing with you probably. There is a large amount of U.S. Army air in this game. So, John Longshore Decision Temptation right now is $240 for Axis Empires Deluxe Edition. That is the only thing they have on the table in the immediate future that I think I will probably buy. That is a good game, and until the next Goss thing comes out, whether that's a big game or a magazine game, I'm not sure that they have anything, and that's substantially farther away. Then I'm not sure that they have anything that I need. So, Jason Patterson asks, why do we never hear your clipper? So I use the Oregon Laminations standard clipper. They are noticeably quieter. I'll be quiet for a second. I don't know if you could hear that or not, but these are like noticeably quieter than the deluxe clippers. There are unfortunately too many monster games that don't have sufficient small scenarios. I can think of too many examples that where that's true. Vincenzo's definition of if he doesn't have room to set it up, it's a monster. That's pretty fair too. There's a lot of monster games floating around out there, right? So what you got to think about is I'm always going to encourage people to think about whether they're actually going to play a game or not, right? If you're just going to buy it and it's going to sit on a shelf, you're going to look at it lovingly every couple of years, I think you should probably save your money and go buy liquor or whatever. Unless what gives you joy is just having Wargames on the shelf. I always buy with the understanding that I'm going to try to play it at some point. Now, sometimes I'm full of it. That is possibly true. These are actually, this is not the pair of clippers, but the pair of clippers that did get seized by the Transportation Safety Administration were this kind of clipper. So everything looks great. Next to clip, I don't know, man. I'm going to probably be, I'll be honest, next Friday, when we do the next counter clipping show, I'm probably still going to be clipping this. I would, especially since I'm not taking games to clip with me to Seattle, right? So I'm going to still be clipping this in that next show. Let me put it that way. I could see no situation in which that won't be the case. That said, if I get clipping done outside the stream, then I can get even a big game clipped completely and organized in a rather alarmingly short amount of time. Well, Marty, we all hope that they have taken all the extra time that is going into that, to play test it a lot. That said, I haven't kept up with it particularly closely, but I can vouch for the earlier edition of Axis Empires. I think it's very good. Now, where I think some folks might be concerned is with the expanded naval rules, which will kind of de-abstract their naval system. And it took me several weeks to clip Third World War, but I didn't do any clipping until the very end outside of this stream. So normally I have, my own clipping happening, and I can get stuff done pretty quickly. And I clip faster when I'm not streaming than I clip when I'm streaming. There's going to be a lot of pieces in that Axis Empires box, I can tell you that. I mean, to some extent, a lot of pieces, is Eclipse, the new Eclipse, or the new Twilight Imperium, are those monsters? In both cases, I believe you can play them in one sitting. But they come with a lot of pieces. A lot of pieces. They take a long time to set up. They take a long time to tear down. I take a long time to play. I mean, by Wargame standards, they don't take that long. I mean, even Twilight Imperium 3rd Edition, which is the last Twilight Imperium I've played, probably takes about 8 hours to play on average, I'd say is about right. It's kind of an all-day thing, which is why I was only playing it once every 5 years or so, and now there's a new edition of that out, which is supposed to play a bit faster. There is a Vassal Facebook group. There's also a Vassal Discord server where you can look people up. Now, I've got, at this point, I got rid of my Axis Empires games with the notion that I'd be buying them again at some point. At this point, I've got, you might see up in the tiny corner right up here, SPI's War in the Pacific, which does share a decent amount of DNA, I think, with Pacific War. I believe, when we say TWW, if we're talking about Third World War, I think it is a monster, but only if you play a big combined game. If you just play Battle for Germany, which is a decent-sized game, it doesn't take that long. If you play Balkan Front, or whatever the Balkan one is, Southern Front, it doesn't really take that long. Persian Gulf takes a little longer because you get the wind up to, you got a lot of disparate forces that you got to maneuver into position. So situationally, that one takes a little bit of a time. Arctic Front doesn't take that much time. Only if you're playing the entire thing together is it really a monster game, I think. Proud Monster was a magazine game. There are at least a couple examples of magazine games that are monster games. Proud Monster's one of them. Don't forget Death and Destruction, the sequel. But there's also Great War in Europe. That's maybe close to a monster game, and I think that may have been one map. But it was definitely more than... I'm pretty sure it was more than one counter sheet. I don't think I'd probably put that quite in the category, but I think it's close. There's a number of things from Against the Odds. There's that Toppling the Reich, which I've got somewhere, which is like a 3.5 sheet counter sheet game. There's, of course, Desert Fox Deluxe, which is a game that Stigler has oft waxed poetic about. So it looks like we have it looks like we're not having problems with bandwidth, but oh, for Pete's sake. We don't need to deal with that. Sorry about that. Western Desert Torch and Near East, I'd call not monster games. individually, but then you put them all together in War in the Desert, and I think that's a monster game. John Longshore says we need a monster space empire game. You could buy a couple extra boards of Space Empires 4X, or just play it on a cloth map or something like that, and I think you could easily get a monster game out of that, with basically no modifications other than playing on a bigger map. If we're talking about the Compass one, then I think we're talking about Stellar Horizons. I wouldn't call that a Space Empire game. I think that's more of a space exploration game. Mashing P, first of all, welcome to the stream. Has luckily recently picked up Atlantic Wall Lucky 4, The Greatest Day, Where Eagles Dare, and The Devil's Cauldron. There's a reprint of Devil's Cauldron coming pretty soon. But it and Where Eagles Dare are a fantastic experience together. Vincenzo says that War in the Pacific 2nd Edition is a failed monster. Well, I don't know if it fails at being a monster. It's definitely a monster. In fact, it's probably the most stupidly large war game I can think of off the top of my head. Because it's got that whole telescoping scale, and I mean, you could do that, John Longshore, you could do that, as you'll be aware, with Panzer Blitz too. You buy 10 copies of Panzer Blitz and play out, Kursk at the company level or platoon level. I think it's platoon level. Federation Empire, and there are 4X scenarios for Fed Empire as well. I wouldn't call Freedom in the Galaxy a monster though. It's a weekender, I think, if you play the complete campaign. Fed Empire can totally be a monster though. I'll totally buy that. But there's a 4X scenario where you're not playing on the official map and you're kind of exploring as you go, and that actually looks really neat. They were doing that at a Winterfest a few years ago. Twilight Imperium, yeah, like I said, I don't think so. I think we're going to have trouble fitting all this U.S. Army air in a compartment here. We're about to go back to the counter tray. Starfire. Actually, the basic Starfire is really simple. So that's one of those things where, yeah, you could scale it up to whatever you want. But there's also there's a couple different names for the campaign game of that. The one I had, I think, was Imperial Starfire. And that's totally a monster game. And it requires, in my opinion, I think maybe officially it might not require a referee, but I say it requires a referee to work at all well. Jeff Beeler says Fifth Frontier War and Imperium. I don't think so. I think you could play Imperium in a day handily. How many trays for Pacific War? Phil Buxowski, Buxkowski. I think I'm doing that more or less correctly. I don't know yet. I think the plan is going to end up landing in 5 counter trays, which of course ain't fitting in the box. But we'll see what it works out to be. I haven't completed the plan yet. I have a plan to organize it, but the plan is, it's still being planned. So, all right. So now we have, I think I need 2 trays just for the American Air. Do I have another tray here? I thought I did, but no idea what I did with it. So if we put fighters, so level 0 fighters. Of course, you want to be able to find the pieces that you need to set the scenarios up, right? I have played. I played War in Europe, taping the map to the wall, and with the sticky tack as keeping the counters on the wall. That did not work very well, I got to tell you. All right, so level T, F, long range air. RS, subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for the follow. Really appreciate that. I was watching Juzza One's videos on Der Weltkrieg too, so. Yeah, so Stigler, that's exactly the point. I may end up finishing this and then saying, "Hey, there's just too," and that like literally just happened, right? I can't get all these in one compartment. I had planned for one compartment for the levels, status level 0 U.S. Army fighters, and it ain't gonna fit in one, so it's gonna have to be two. So. There's true. That's Fatal Alliances too. Yep, as one of the rather numerous actually World War I monsters. I would totally put Fatal Alliances in there, and I'd totally put Whiff in for World War II. John C. I find that not particularly surprising, given how the letter Y is often used in Anglicization. So I apologize that I have been pronouncing me and everybody else though in the United States have been pronouncing your name incorrectly this entire time. You don't get a sound for unsubscribing. You know, there are people who, and I've been saying, John Longshore, I'm holding off on Distant Worlds 2, but that's also because I don't want to spend the money right this second, because I'm going to Seattle next weekend. So, the Stellaris board game does not look particularly Stellaris-y to me. And I'm somebody that's probably dumped 150 hours into Stellaris, so I like Stellaris a lot. But the board game I don't expect to feel much like the computer game. I'd be happy to be wrong, but that's just my expectation. John C. The DVG trays should be thrown into a mulching machine and given to convicted felons. Those trays are garbage. I do not recommend them. In fact, I strongly recommend against them because the lids do not snap on. So, Lock and Load has deep dish trays where the lids actually snap on, but I think you can only get them as part of like a kit. So I will buy Distant Worlds 2. It's just a matter of whether it's going to happen, now. I don't really have time to do anything with it right now. That's the problem. So, I mean, I like just the base game of Stellaris, but I've got plenty of the DLCs too. I mean, that's kind of the business Paradox is cranking out huge quantities of DLC for you to buy. So, all right. Now, that was the level 0 air, so I don't know if the level 1 will be easier to... Yeah, maybe. There's less level 1 than there is level 0 total. We'll grab another tray. John Longshore, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Didn't even ask a question on that. We have actually already mentioned Ted Racer's Great War in Europe, which I've played. It's a good game. All right, so as much as I hate to do this, I'm going to reorient the counters here. So, interesting. So, thank you, John, once again for that. I really do appreciate it. Super Chats are on. One way... There's enough people in these things that we have reached the point, we're actually well past the point, where I do have some trouble keeping up with the chat and missing things. So one way that you can be sure that your question or comment or whatever does get attention is if you use the Super Chat, because then it comes across in a giant yellow bar across the screen. So, excellent, Linda. And so you and John are playing Cedar Creek. That is out of Death Valley, which is a fabulous package of GBACW goodness. I managed to film the entire GBACW video without once calling it GCACW. So I'm very proud of myself for doing that. I almost called it GCACW right at the end, but I did not. I was close, but not quite. Vincenzo says Distant Worlds 2 is 2 steps back from Distant Worlds Universe. That's probably true, but Distant Worlds Universe is a bit... I don't want to use the word half-assed, but it's kind of assembled, and you'll know what I mean if you've played Distant Worlds Universe. You can really tell that it is a thing that was assembled from parts. Very difficult to figure out where all the parts are coming from, right? It was originally released as multiple individual games, and I had problems with it. And it's very difficult to do video on it because every window is actually an individual window, which kind of sucks. Now the lock and load, I haven't handled them, but I've looked at videos of them. The lock and load deep dish trays are nice. But you get a box for the $30 too. Is that a lot for 3 trays in a box? Yeah, probably. But you know, don't complain to me. Complain to Dave Heath. So I apologize. Let's get it out of the way where I apologize for mispronouncing everybody's name. I actually completely believe that, Stigler. Find that not difficult to believe at all. So I guess we're going to put the night bombers or night fighters in their own tray, their own compartment. I am normally completely fine with the GDW with the GMT trays. The only issue I have with them is when there's not enough space in the box to fit them, which is not a tray problem, it's a box problem. Mashing P. I'll be honest, I don't know what the full price on Death Valley is. I know it's a good deal more than $53. And frankly, the Stigler will answer this too, but I'll answer it for him. Frankly, the full price is a very good price for Death Valley. It is a very value heavy box, in addition to being a relatively heavy box. So, tacticals. Yeah, it's going to take a while to get this thing done. Vincenzo Beretta. That's I think the answer to that is yes, because I'm pretty significantly serious tabletop person here, and I have yet to I own it. I have yet to manage to even really try to get into it. To Gary Grigsby's War in the Pacific, that is. It is a lot to deal with, and that's not necessarily an issue so much as the primitiveness of its interface is what kind of disincentivizes me from learning it every time I sign up for it, every time I load the thing. There is also an expansion for Death Valley coming out as well, which is going to add a bunch of additional battles. Stigler, how many additional battles will the Death Valley expansion add to Death Valley? There's going to be plenty. So even without the expansion, there's a lot of value in the box. So I have no hesitation in recommending. I mean, this is making an assumption here that you are willing to deal with a relatively heavy regiment-level American Civil War tactical system. If the answer is yes, then I unhesitatingly recommend Death Valley. Stigler, I don't know if it's the best, but man, it's certainly up there. in the last few years, GMT has done a lot of really, really value-strong packages. One of which is Death Valley, one of which is both the new version of SPQR, the new version of Great Battles of Alexander, the Men of Iron tri-pack, the Battles from the American Revolution tri-pack. Those are all really strong entries. And I am not inclined to have them fight it out like Thunderdome. I think they're all really good, high-value products for the money. Biggest and smallest monster wargames. So that runs into the problem that we were kind of skirting earlier, which is that you can always define it by example, right? This is a monster wargame or this isn't, but then we run into the same problem that we have when we try to define a wargame, right? Where we have an argument about whether Twilight Struggle is a wargame or not. Because we don't have a rule, we're defining it by example. Biggest monster wargame is, as was mentioned, I suspect the answer is the Death Ride Kursk from Grognard Simulations, because that's just crazy big, and I don't know if anything else is that big. Death Valley has a large number of small to very small scenarios in it. And then it's got some bigger scenarios too, including Cedar Creek, and I think it's third Winchester. That's the biggest of the Winchesters. I think the expansion will have second Winchester in it, which really was more of a skirmish, as I recall. And maybe I should try just the Guadalcanal scenario. But you know what? I've got this. I can play this Guadalcanal scenario. I've got War in the Pacific. I can play that Guadalcanal scenario. Hell, I could play, War, Empire of the Sun and get the whole war in the amount of time that it would take me to figure out the first 2% of the interface in Gary Grigsby's War in the Pacific. So Mo from Mo's Game Table is here. And he is, of course, correct when he says that the creature that ate Sheboygan is, in fact, a monster game. Doug says that Twilight Struggle is nothing like Strike Force 1, and therefore it is not a wargame. That's fair. The TSWW... Yeah, but I don't think that any of the individual titles is as well. We're going to get into a bit of a semantic territory here. Is Death Ride Kursk one game, or is it 6 games, or however many boxes it is? Because you can't just go bot. Well, you can, but it's $2,500. You've got to kind of put multiple products together, and I'm not sure that. I think you call that one game because it really kind of is one game released across multiple products. But then if you're saying that, then shouldn't you count the Second World War series as well, which isn't as big as Europa at this point, but it's getting real close. And some of the individual games, like Day of Infamy and Singapore, are really enormous on their own. I'm not sure they're quite as big as Death Ride Kursk, but they're big. That comes up every time we try to define monster games, by the way. The creature that ate Sheboygan joke. Also, that's another thing that I think is probably something that you could get general agreement about. I suspect that the one-day turns of that War in the Pacific Admirals edition is really just a bit ridiculous. I mean, that sounds ridiculous. Whoops, we're screwing this up. There we go. Tacticals, yeah, okay. Oh, and all right. So I feel like I'm going to have a lot less trouble finding pieces parts. Game that has the most counters, the thing that I have that has the most counters is Atlantic Wall. Decisions Atlantic Wall. 16 counter sheets. That was my biggest single box war game. I think even Case Blue is a little smaller than that, I think. But map area wise, Case Blue is bigger. Well, that's another problem with a game title like Into the Woods or On Battles, is that because of the way BGG's search works, you're probably going to have a hard time finding games without distinctive words in the titles at this point. That is a problem that I have seen before. Peterberg says 23,000 counters in Death Ride Kursk. That's nutty. Yeah, but Gold Juno Sword, you're right, and I have that too, but those are 5/8 inch counters. So there's quite a few less counters in that than there is in the half-inch counter sheets of Atlantic Wall. Is King of Tokyo a monster game? I suppose, by Mo's definition, I suppose it is. I probably don't have 23,000 count. I don't have, the only Death Ride game I've got is Eris down here. I don't think I have 23,000 counters for ASL, but I'd bet I've got 6,000. And I do count it for collection purposes as one game or two games. I count Starter Kit as its own thing because Starter Kit is kind of standalone, right? It took me, I mean, I wasn't clocking the hours as such, but it took me a month or two to do all the clipping and collation of Atlantic Wall. Oh, that's not bad. Mike Anthony says, Into the Woods only comes up with 3 results, so that's good. Highway to the Reich, Hemedad, thanks for stopping by. Highway to the Reich, either edition of Highway to the Reich does not have a good reputation. There are 3 editions of it. There's the first edition from SPI, there's the second edition from SPI, and there's it's not called this, but I'm going to call it a 3rd edition from Decision Games, and they all have significant problems, by all reports. Now, On Battles is just unfindable. It's not called that anymore. It's called something else, but I forget what they changed the name of On Battles to, but I'm glad they changed the name of On Battles, because it does actually look quite promising, and I would like to see it succeed, and if it's called On Battles, it will not succeed, because nobody will be able to frigging find it. Magic Pieces Arkham Horror trading card game, or whatever we're calling that. I don't know if it's trading card game or customizable card or whatever it is. I think I have that. You can buy an absolutely asinine amount of stuff for those kinds of games, for a lot of those kinds of games, and certainly the Arkham Horror one. If Hemedad, if you are particularly interested in Market Garden, then there are a number, I think, of really good options for you. Unfortunately, all of them are out of print. But there's a couple more coming back. So there's Holland 44 is a really good game. There's a new edition of Hell's Highway that's coming from New England Simulations. I don't have any visibility on when that's coming, but it's probably no more than a couple years out. There's also, as was mentioned up thread, there's the combination of Where Eagles Dare and the Devil's Cauldron. There is a reprint of the Devil's Cauldron, which is the northern half of it with the 82nd Airborne and the British 1st Airborne part of it. So Nijmegen and Arnhem. And it's a really strong game. It's also awesome to combine it with Regal's Dare to get the rest of Hell's Highway. But highly recommended. I had a chance to play that a couple years ago at Winterfest, and it was a fantastic time. It's a great system. It's a lot of fun to play. And if you can get the more difficult piece of it to get, which is the Devil's Cauldron, then Where Eagles Dare is somewhat less hard to find. Iggy Krichtal says that the new name of On Battles is First Victories Wellington versus Napoleon. That's not the name of the system, though. The new name of the system, that's the name of the first volume. Marty says that Hell's Highway just started playtesting 2024. is the guess. Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Glory and Empire. It Never Snows. So I have It Never Snows. I haven't played it. It's a company level market garden game. However, and it's a standard combat system game, and I like SCS. I like SCS a lot, and I specifically like some of the smaller SCS games. But I have tended not to like the bigger ones. Now I haven't tried It Never Snows, but I kind of think that I won't enjoy it because for a topic like Market Garden, in which I am very interested, I want a more detailed treatment, and SCS is not going to give me that treatment. It's not that kind of game. In addition to that, from playing Day of Days, which is the Normandy SCS game, I feel like it's just too many pieces, and it's providing you a lot of busy work of moving individual companies without necessarily providing you with a lot of interesting decisions to make. I think it's a bad scale for OCS. And to some extent, at least, some of that same logic might apply to It Never Snows. So, Glory and Empire. That seems to come up every week. I feel like there's a decent number of folks interested in that. Jeff Beeler says he'd like a market garden game where the Allies get free deployment and the Germans get hidden setup, drawing cards for which units they get so the Allies get a surprise. That's an interesting idea. I can tell you that a couple years ago when we played Market Garden in GTS, one of the two tables that was running it, we had 2 full campaigns going. One of the 2 tables that was running it did use the free deployment for the Allied airdrops, and it absolutely broke the game. The Allies just dropped the entire 1st Airborne Division right outside of Arnhem. The entire division just marched in, and there was no way to extract them from Arnhem in the amount of time that the game provides. So it really doesn't work. Now, could you balance that with things like hidden setup for the Germans and stuff like that? Maybe. But that's not what was done in that particular excursion. SCS North Africa might work well because the unit density in North Africa is not that high. It's 3 counter sheets, if I'm not mistaken. That's not that much, and some of those are markers. SCS is not an incredibly marker heavy system, but it's not marker free either. So I can readily believe that North Africa is quite good. And there's people that love Day of Days too. So, just take my nonsense with a grain of salt, right? I'm just giving you my opinion. And what Marty says is right too. Many Market Garden games can be you can just say Allies can drop where they want. That's true. But he's also right that if you just allow the Germans free deployment, then you're also creating problems because they can just man the bottlenecks. And in either case, you are likely to end up with something that doesn't resemble a historical campaign, which to some extent you want, but to some extent is undesirable for a game to make the historical outcome impossible. That's a problem. That is the problem that we ran into, Stigler, is the Allies not dropping in the historical drop zones. Jeff Beeler says that North Africa games can be monster games at the right unit scale. So, I mean, if we are using Campaign for North Africa as the example, then I think that I think Campaign for North Africa is a monster game for about 4 different reasons, right? One of which is complexity, which is, I think, mitigated to some extent now. One of which is length it takes to play. One of which is footprint. One of which is, just component weight. How many pieces are in the box? That's a legitimate metric, I think, for deciding whether a game is a monster game or not. But generally speaking, it's not the deciding metric. Hemedad, one thing about the Devil's Cauldron is it's got a very strong scenario selection. So you can start playing it right away with mini-map scenarios, go up to one-map scenarios. You may find that you want the whole series after that because it's really good. So... Now, is the locations of the Allied historical drop zones part of the reason why the Allies had as much trouble as they did? Yeah, absolutely. But then if your system is robust, you end up with, and you allow them to drop wherever they want, then you mitigate that and potentially make things too easy for the Allies, which is what we saw at Winterfest a couple of years ago. Yeah, Roger, that's I think it could be balanced, but you would end up with exactly like that kind of situation, and you would also end up with the fact that part of the Allied problem is that a bunch of the British First Airborne drops far away from Arnhem, and if they don't, then the entire division just files into the city, and I don't think it makes much sense. So if we are stipulating that it is possible to design a Market Garden game with Allied free deployment, or at least with more flexibility than they had historically, by giving the Germans extra flexibility as well, then yeah, I totally agree with that. That is something that that's possible, right? It's just that the GTS Market Garden didn't do that. John, we could run long if you want, but I don't know if we're going to or not. I've already been clipping, as of this moment, I've been clipping for about 2 hours straight. And I guess the next question is going to be, what am I going to do after the stream? Well, it's probably going to just be more of this, of me sitting here clipping and drinking scotch. So, we got to make choices, right? There are a couple of counters with errata on them here as well, which I didn't actually check, so I should check the errata. The errata's posted on GMT's website. Tacticals, bombers. A lot of U.S. Army air. We're not done with the U.S. Army air yet. There's a certain point after which they don't need the drop zones. In GTS. At least I didn't play the British, so at least the Americans, there's a point after which the 82nd Airborne no longer needs to protect their drop zones. For a while they do, though. Husa, I agree with that. There's all kinds of interesting airborne operations. Operation Varsity, we've seen relatively few games about that, for example. I think we're just going to finish these OSBs and control markers, and that'll be it for the stream at least, and then we'll at least get a short break from clipping. Counter sheet 1 is empty, so only 9 more weeks of counter clipping before we're done with it. I don't know. There's also a lot of terrain up there that's not good to drop on, so. Hemedad also mentions that the next Gauss game, and this is correct, the next full-sized Gauss game is going to be called Over the Rhine, which is not a great title, but, it's Market Garden and it's Gauss, so, that is an easy button push for me. Doug, that's one of the reasons why I like the GTS scale, particularly, not necessarily for every topic, but for Market Garden it works really well. In general, you are the commander of a division, right? They're not all divisions, but they're mostly divisions. So you get to make decisions from that division commander's perspective, right? That wearing of too many hats problem is a really common wargame design choice that gets made and I like some of the games that do it badly. Whiff does it very badly, for example, but I love Whiff, right? Pete Bartlett, thanks for stopping by. Lots of people love the big SCS games, and like I said, I have not played It Never Snows specifically, so maybe it mitigates the concerns I have with it, and it's not an obscenely expensive game, but you get a lot when you buy it. It's 5 maps, I think 3 counter sheets, and there's as is the case with all those games, there's a wealth of scenarios, so you don't have to play the whole thing. All Glencairn glasses are the same. The only one that I have that is different is the one from Binny's Beverage Depot, which says Binny's on it. Now, I did look at getting custom Glencairn glasses with the Ardwulf's Lair logo on them. They're like $50 a piece, and I didn't think that made any sense. So, Jeff Beeler asks, Patrick of Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials, welcome back. Asks about an Operation Varsity game. I am aware that there's been a couple, but not very many. Certainly. Well, I am here to keep everybody company, right? So in the context of the stream, I want the game to look nice. And I want it to be easy to handle, but also in the context of the stream, since, we're now a thing on Monday nights, we also want to provide a good example for the young wargamers to make their games look nice too. Whew. Casca 666 Longinus is how I'd pronounce that. Got a copy of Guderian's Blitzkrieg, but everything was in one giant bag. That's a mess. Yeah, that might have been, if that was off of eBay, that might have been one that I was looking at, actually. So, I want to talk, we've got about 20 more minutes, and I'm probably going to spend most of it talking about Pacific War. And a lot of it, what I'm going to say here, is stuff that I at least tangentially mention in the unboxing video, which is coming out tomorrow at 10 a.m. Is Pacific War a monster game? Yeah, I think it is. I think you have to call it that because it's large and heavy and has tons of pieces and a big footprint. It takes a long time to play, but like a lot of other monster games, it's got scenarios. But unlike a lot of other monster games, it's really oriented toward the scenarios rather than to the campaign game. And Mark has talked about this. I've mentioned it a bunch of times, and, thanks to Mark for saying this kind of stuff. But this is all stuff that's in the designer's notes for the original edition, right? This is fundamentally not a strategic game, but an operational game. The heart of Pacific War is in those campaign scenarios. So there are 4 different levels of scenario in Pacific War. There are and I think I'm going to get this right this time. There are the engagement scenarios, which are individual. They're not even like a whole operation or much less a whole turn. They're just battle cycles, and I think you can get multiple. I forget how this is defined exactly, but you get I think 2 battle cycles in the Pearl Harbor scenario, for example. So they're just individual battle cycles or sequences of battle cycles is what those engagement scenarios are. And there may be, there might be air combat, there might be naval combat, there might be land combat, there might be all 3 theoretically. The battle scenarios represent individual operations, and in quite a similar way to the Victory Games Vietnam. The game is organized around operations. So you have command points and you pay for operations, and then you designate, based on the number of command points you have for the operation, you designate which units are activated, and then you activate them and can move with them and do things, okay? The battle scenarios are basically one operation, whereas the campaign scenarios, what I have repeatedly and incorrectly called the operational scenarios, are situations in which it is expected that multiple operations will occur. Okay. I'm gonna probably sit here tonight and watch another episode of, or try and endure another episode of Discovery, and clip more counters. So it's exactly the same thing. People that say, I don't have time to clip counters. Well, do you have time? Maybe you don't, but do you have time to watch TV? Because if you do, then you got time to clip counters. And your games could look nice too. You don't have to play with those uncircumcised counters. So, if we are defining Monster Game as it takes a certain number of hours to play, then much of Pacific War can be played in way under that. Some of those campaign scenarios are like 2-hour scenarios. They're not necessarily, and I think the estimated play times are in the scenario book. But the scenario book is, I've been reading through the already available electronic core rules booklet. I think we're just going to put this in here for now. And I haven't had the scenario booklet available until it showed up today. So that'll do. So there's I think it can certainly, it's an intimidating game, because even in the the campaign scenarios it's a pretty complicated game, but I think it also does give you the tools to kind of work your way up to those scenarios, right? You can start with the engagement scenarios, play through all of those, and there's 8 or 10 of them. There's 8 or 12 or something like that battle scenarios that you can get all kinds of practice in before tackling one of those campaign scenarios. And in all cases, the engagement or battle scenarios should be no more than a couple hours. Not counting setup, I've already said that I had a fair amount of... It took quite a while to... I'm not sure I said this tonight, but I said it in the unboxing video. When I set up Pearl Harbor, it took an hour to set it up. But that was because part of it was because I wasn't aware necessarily of what I was looking for, and I had to figure it out based on the counter mix. But part of that was just the way it's organized, right? Because you can fit 3 counter trays in that box, and that ain't enough for this game, this 10 counter sheet game. I think this is one more counter sheet than the Victory Games version, I think, but these are not all half-inch counters. Victory Games are all half-inch counters. I don't have the sheet in front of me, but you'll see it in the unboxing. The ships are on 9/16 inch counters, which is an interesting choice. I feel like it makes it look even more like Empire of the Sun. But pretty much all those ships never going to hit the map, right? You're gonna put them on the off-map displays, and you're going to they're never going to actually be placed on the map themselves. So, all right. So, fighter. All right. Jeff Anderson says NCAA tournament is prime clipping time. Absolutely. I haven't watched the NCAA tournament in decades, I gotta tell you. So Jeff, we do not normally establish a topic for the Tuesday stream until 5 minutes before the Tuesday stream. Chad Kennedy says he watched Japanese woodworking videos. Sure, why not? That's all kind of cool. There's all kind of cool content on YouTube. John Madison, first of all, welcome back. Do I prefer 9/16 over half-inch counters? it really depends on the game. I mean, if it's a one map game and you can fit the game and have, you could fit the hex grid on the map and get away with 9/16 inch or 5/8 inch counters, then sure, do that. But the fact is that my taste in games tends to run toward games with a lot of hexes and a lot of counters, and those are much easier to produce with half-inch counters. So, which is why, of all three clippers, this is the 2mm. You notice how silent it is today. Sometimes it does get squeaky, but which is why this clipper has I've probably gone through 150,000 counters with this particular clipper at this point. This is why I don't need to look anymore to make sure I don't Nike clip stuff. Not that it never happens, but not very often. Oh, Patrick of Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials is getting hosed on the shipping on that. I've had that happen before. I was concerned about that happening today, but the UPS ferry showed up and dropped them off, both giant ass boxes, on my doorstep. So what was in there was 2 copies of Pacific War, 2 copies of Vietnam, 1 Salerno 43, 1 Army Group Center, and 1 Into the Woods. The 2 copies of Vietnam and Salerno 43 were in their own box. Everything else was in one huge footlocker-sized box, which I can only assume that the UPS person requires new testicles after bringing those to my porch. So this is, John, we've covered this. This is the Oregon Laminations 2mm corner rounder, and yes, it'll totally clip whatever you want. But for 5/8 inch or 9/16 inch counters, I will generally use the 2.5mm clipper instead. That is an aesthetic choice. I think you guys are having fun with me now here. I generally just so it depends. Honestly, so for these, I just pop them out. They just came out of the sheet, and it's fine. On the other hand, for Under an Iron Sky that I was clipping yesterday, those counters do not tear out very easily. They leave huge dog ears. And so I was actually removing them from the sheet with a utility knife. You can... cabs is absolutely still a thing. But they meet at Mosul, the Mid-Ohio Youth Soccer League type of thing. John, see, one of them was for Fucko. Same with Vietnam. So... yes, we are in Columbus, Ohio. In fact, if you are interested in doing stuff with the Columbus team, drop me a line at ardwulfslair@gmail.com if you're in the Columbus area. Because we need a couple extra people. One of the groups is looking to recruit. So there are videos out there where it's some person reading the rule book like this, and it is abso-friggin-lutely unwatchable. So the Under an Iron Sky counters, and in fact all of the thin red line counters that I've handled, have what looks like a plastic type of coating on them that doesn't tear away easily, and I believe that is what is actually causing that. I did find that it's just better to just cut them out. Now, it's also a huge game, right? So it does add a lot of work to the total project. It adds a lot of time to have to cut the sheets counters out of the sheet as well. So I'm very happy that I don't have to do that with these. But even like multi-mans, which don't come out of the sheets quite as easily as these, I still just tear those out. I don't normally have a problem with that. Another scenario in which I will use a cutting tool of some kind to remove the counters from the sheets is if there are center nibs. Then I will absolutely do that. Chad Kennedy, there are OCS tutorial scenarios Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So You can go on the webpage if you want and register, but you can also just show up and don't worry, I will find a place for you. So just come find me. What I use is one of these small utility blade knives. I find that I like this specific one because it's got kind of a little thumb catch there, so I can kind of get good leverage on it. And it's got the snap-off blades, so you can keep the blade can stay sharp. And it's got a wheel to tighten it, so that you don't have to worry about the blade staying out. Well, you got to retract the blade every time. Now, this is another one that I have. I don't like this one as much. It doesn't have a catch. The blade is just supposedly doesn't go back in until you pull it back in. I don't know. I don't know that I trust it. But it's got a nice weight to it, and this is a Master Force brand, whereas the other one is a Craftsman. I've got one of these ancient things, too. This is literally 30 years old. I used this back when I worked at the injection molding place when I was like 18. But I still have the knife. I'm still using the same blades, too, for that matter. You can use an X-Acto knife, but I don't like the way like the classic metal handled X-Acto knives. I don't like the way they feel. I feel like that metal handle is kind of slippery. So Peter Bergs mentions the ASL scenario Operation Varsity series. So there you go. So, I mean, I knew there was Operation Varsity scenarios in ASL somewhere because there's scenarios for everything. There's somebody that has put together some actual stamping thing where it has a big lever. You line up all your counters and you stamp it, and it cuts off all the corners. And while neat, I'm not convinced it's faster than this. But then again, I'm pretty fast at this, so. Oh, this thing? Are we talking about this guy? The official unboxing knife? It's back. It was in a drawer somewhere, and I didn't have it for a couple of months. And fortunately, it turned up, so. I believe during my unboxing, some of my Into the Woods counters fell out of the sheet. So, fortunately, they were not lost. They were recovered. Yeah, but I don't need that. I got these. And these are the replacement blades are cheaper for these than they are with X-Acto knives. If I were doing serious modeling work, I would want to. I mean, I have a couple X-Acto knives somewhere. But John says that Mark Herman also has a big Rambo ass knife too. That's not what that is, but that's just a common pocket knife that I have to remember to not take on the airplane with me in a couple of days. There are also other types of X-Acto handles other than those classic steel tubular ones. So you use what works best for you. I have I'm told, relatively large hands, and that's a big factor, right? People say that, oh, you have huge hands, but then I handle the Logitech X54 HOTAS throttle and stick, and apparently that thing's designed for friggin' Sasquatch because my hands feel tiny on that thing. Scalpel. So I actually have it is not in the drawer because I will reach into the drawer and cut myself on it. But yes, scalpel blades are way sharper than X-Acto knives. They're designed to be used once and then thrown away. But I actually do have a scalpel and scalpel blades too for specific work. And I'm trying to remember why I bought them, and I can't off the top of my head. We are almost done with the U.S. Army Air. The U.S. Navy Air's been done for ages. Marty Sample asks, so, I mean, this is a problem with a lot of World War II games and West Front World War II games specifically is that who wants to play the Germans or who wants to play the Soviets? I mean, it's the same situation, right? In 1941, who wants to play the Soviets and get kicked in the face for 6 months before you get to do anything? To some extent, those challenges can be alleviated by a good choice of scale. So, for example, the Vance von Bory's other system, the Rhodes system that I've spoken glowingly of many times, those are specific battles that are chosen specifically because they offer both sides good operational decisions. So, on the other hand, if you play it, if you're playing Europa, where it's 16 miles to the hex and 2 turns per month and whatever it is, then you may not necessarily feel like you have space to have fun as the Germans in 44 or the Soviets in 41, for example. That's a design decision that a designer has to address, and which a designer designing inside a series might be more challenged by because they are faced with the constraints of the series. So, Hemi Dad asks if there's an West Front World War II monster that covers the whole thing from D-Day. Not really. Not that I would call a monster. There's plenty of games that do that. One of the best is Steve Dolge's and Just a Guard, other YouTube channels to which you should all be subscribed. Just got back from Game On in Seattle. Ironically, I'm going to Seattle, and Game On is not this week. But they played the Mighty Endeavor, the SCS Mighty Endeavor, which is a fabulous game, which does exactly what you are describing. But I wouldn't call it a monster. I don't think you could reasonably consider it a monster. It's 2.5 maps, kind of, if you add the East Front section, which you don't have to, and honestly, I wouldn't. But I think they did, and they had fun with it, and it's, not something I can adequately describe in the 4 minutes we have left. Let me put it that way. But check out their channels for stuff on the Mighty Endeavor. Now, once the Market Garden game comes out for Goss, then you're going to have a good chunk of the late 44 West Front covered by that series. Will we have scenarios to support that is a question that I think is reasonable to ask. So Marty mentions, of course, and I should have thought of this because it's clearly a monster. Second Front, the Europa game Second Front, current market value of which is something like $400 to $600. It's a huge game, and it does in fact cover the entire Western Front. From the invasion of Sicily in July of 1943 all the way to the end of the war. We've played it. It took about a little over a year to play, and by the end of it, I believe I was not alone in being thoroughly sick of it. It is an obvious choice for that. And there's not that many games that do the whole thing from D-Day on that are also monsters, but Second Front totally counts. Just a Guard. Yeah, welcome back to the channel. Yeah, you can do it that way. That's the Battle for Germany shtick, where you play both sides. You're playing the Germans facing the Russians and the Allies facing the Germans. And it's a really clever idea, Jim Dunnigan's idea, that worked, notably well in Battle for Germany, and also works fine in SCS: The Mighty Endeavor, which is a great game. But it's also a great game solitaire, just to play, the Allies and the Germans, and see what you can do with the Germans, right? Atlantic Wall does go through to August, but there's a huge map gap there between the Cobra Breakout and where you end up with in September, which is where the rest of the games pick up. Even though there's not that much of a time gap, there's a huge space gap. So the maps, I guess the easier way to explain that is the maps do not all line up. Mike Macheski mentions France 1944. I wouldn't call that a monster. But that game does have an intriguing reputation, and there is an East Front companion game coming out as at some point. I'm not sure where Mark is at with that. And I don't have the France 1944 game, so I'm not like super invested in the Russia 1944 either. But if I did have the France game, I would probably be pretty pumped about the Russia game. And yes, Stigler is right. That is a really great wrinkle. The Battle for Germany shtick. It's been done several other times, but Battle for Germany was the original. Genius Jim Dunnigan did it. John Madison says that CCA. So CCA is cross-channel attack. It is the OCS Normandy game. But at this moment, it does not work with Beyond the Rhine. You cannot combine the two. The maps do line up, but the unit scales are different. So as of right now it's still early. There's nothing that says that won't change. So as of right now, I don't think you could combine the two into one giant experience without a rather huge kludge at the beginning of September. War in Europe has Cold War monsters. There's a lot, actually. I got a couple of them down here, and I've mentioned Under an Iron Sky tonight. So if we're talking about Cold War Gone Hot stuff, we've got... I don't think NATO, the new NATO Cold War Gone Hot, the new Bruce Maxwell game, I don't think that's a monster, but it's a bit close. It's 2 maps. It took us a couple months to play. Third World War, if you play the whole thing, I think that counts. The 1985 series from Thin Red Line, that's Under an Iron Sky, Deadly Northern Lights, and Sacred Oil. Those are all out now. All of those individually are monsters, and you put them all together, and you've got something that's pretty absurdly large. So yeah, and plus if you go back to things like Objective Moscow, or the Next War, which is the genesis of the 1985 series in the first place, which is I think Jim Dunnigan designed it. Mark Herman was the developer on that. That's definitely a monster. So there's a lot of Cold War monsters. Mo from Mo's Game Table says that Scott Hall from the WWE passed away after being taken off of life support. Was this the fella who had some kind of minor surgery, but then as a complication had like a series of severe heart attacks? So WWE means World Wrestling Entertainment, I assume, which is something that I'm not super into. I watched it as a kid, don't get me wrong, but then I became an actual wrestler and was required to disregard it. Chad Kennedy mentions that Deadly Northern Lights is probably headed for a reprint. Officially, I don't know if officially is the word you want to use, but Fabrizio has said that that's probably going to be this year sometime. So the reprint of Deadly Northern Lights. Hip replacement, yeah. So... any kind of surgery is risky, right? Even maybe not the surgery I had, because that was damn trivial. It was terrifying, but it was trivial. But I mean, any kind of serious surgery, anytime they're putting you under, it's potentially very serious. And even if they're not, sometimes there can always be complications. Do not come here for your healthcare questions, though. Doug mentions that one of the questions was about non-hypothetical Cold War monsters. Well, India, Pakistan, or India, China, you could do games on those, but you also have Vietnam, right? That's a Cold War monster, right? That's a war we fought. There's the Joe Belkowski Korean War. I don't think is a monster either, but some people might argue with that. I don't think it is. I think you could play it in an afternoon, a long afternoon maybe. So, yes, William Hurt also passed away. As did Sergei Korolev, actually. So, died on, I don't know if he died on an operating table or not, but died as a, because of what was supposed to have been a routine surgery. Go Soviet medicine. So, there's also OCS Korea, which I'd say is probably a monster. Are there OCS games that aren't monsters? Reluctant Enemies is, not, I think, clearly not a monster. I think that we're going to finish the counters that we have, and so we got just a couple more minutes. I think Sicily 2 is on the edge of not being a monster. It's just one map as well, but it takes longer to play than Reluctant Enemies. Chad Kennedy, Russia, Afghanistan games. I don't can't think of any offhand. I'm pretty sure there have been some. I think Tunisia is still in monster territory, actually. Burma also. Again, based on playtime, I think those are still monster games. Smolensk. Yeah, I think Smolensk still is. I think it's about a 20-hour game. And I think that's about what, for me, the time footprint of Monster is. I think if you're looking at 15 or 20 hours, you can no longer do it in a single sitting, then I think you're looking at a Monster. And I think Tunisia, Burma will be into that neighborhood. Sicily 2, not so much. The Beast, which is a movie about a Soviet tank crew in Afghanistan. That's a good movie with an American cast. So if you're looking for Russian accents, you're not going to get them. So, see, Stigler says that time doesn't matter, and I don't. I think that might be Stigler's bias toward playing bigger games on Vassal, which I think is worthy of its own discussion, and I think there's a huge incentive to do it that way. But maybe that's why he feels like time's not a factor, because really, time is in your hands when you're playing on Vassal. You can dedicate as much or as little time as you want. It's less of a problem. Also, if you're solitarying it, you don't have to worry about other people's time, right? So, all right, tactical, bombers, and even at level 2, there's still a lot of friggin' U.S. Army air. Wow. So, I might try to consolidate that, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to. All right, so we have one counter sheet and a little less than half of one counter sheet, and we are looking at about one tray full. So we'll see how that works out. I'm probably going to move on to the American bases next. I think I'm just going to go through and do all the Allied stuff. The miscellaneous allies, the British and the Dutch and stuff like that, probably the Chinese probably go in their own tray. But we also have all the land stuff, and there's a shitload of land units in this game. Mike, I don't think there's an example of that, though. I mean, if you're kind of thinking of and this is a sense in which I think that makes sense. The amount of time it takes to play the game is kind of a derived number, right? Based on a number of other components, like how complicated it is and what the turn sequence looks like and how big it is and how many pieces you have to move around. So it is kind of not a fundamental parameter of the game, like the number of counters that are in the game, or the number of square inches on the map, or the number of, I think a more logical metric is actually the number of occupiable spaces on the map. So hexes in the context that we're talking about right now. I think that's actually a more important number than the number of square inches, right? And those are all more fundamental numbers than the amount of time it takes to play the game. So if Stigler is saying that's why he doesn't consider that to be a factor, I actually think that makes a lot of sense. All right, let's answer the last few questions, then talk about what's going on. So Mike Bacheski says he hates Vassal, doesn't have the physical tactility. I totally understand that, but you get used to Vassal too. Stigler says Vassal's better than face-to-face in nearly every respect. I don't want to say nearly every respect, but it has a lot to recommend it. The fact that you don't have to spend nearly as much time in setup and teardown is a factor. The fact that you don't have to dedicate a room to it is a factor. The fact that you can hit save and walk away and come back to it in a week or a month or whatever. That's a big that's a major attraction. Trevor Just, first of all, welcome back. Does GMT need to make a bigger box to hold the counters and trays? So we talked about this a little bit. Of the 5 things that came in, I might have an issue getting Vietnam into the box, but I'm good on the other 3 games. Okay, so the only real one that we're just going to have an issue with is Pacific War, and it's already in a 4-inch box. I don't think GMT can realistically make the box bigger. So I think we're just going to have to eat it in this case and figure out a storage solution that works. Whether it's in plastic trays, I don't know how it's going to work yet. Whether it's in plastic trays or whether it ends up being in, I buy another Pacific War box and put the 5 counter trays in that. William Aarons, thanks for stopping by. He asked about the ultimate real-life war game of the Cold War reforger exercises of the 1970s and 1980s. So that's actually something that, boy, that deserves its own show, and furthermore, it deserves. So at least one of those exercises actually almost resulted in World War III. So that not only deserves its own space to explore as a topic, but it also demands actual people that know what they're talking about and not some rando on the internet like myself. So if we're going to talk about that, I would want somebody on that knows more about the topic than me, because that is not my field. Bisnunia says, okay, so Jeff Beeler says Vassal is easier than Tabletop Simulator. I agree, but there's a selection bias there because of the kinds of games that I play. There are games in which the differences are mitigated because you're moving tiny, blocks around instead of moving lower numbers of larger pieces around rather than counters and stacks. Bisnunia says Vassal doesn't work well. What is he doing wrong? I mean, to some extent, you do have to get used to it. There is a bit of a learning curve, but once you get the learning curve down, it really does work well. John Madison says TSWW is the worst at somehow cramming into their flimsy boxes, and once you open it, the game expands 2 inches. So that's the Second World War series from Diffraction. I can't really complain about their boxes because they're huge boxes that contain a huge amount of stuff, and regardless of the size of the box, there was no way you were going to fit all the pieces in that box anyway, right? You have to have an outside-the-box storage solution for those games. I don't think there's a way around that, and therefore I don't think the relative flimsiness of the boxes is really a particular problem. I mean, it's a problem, it's just not this problem, you know what I'm saying? Trevor says, buy a semi-truck to store Pacific War, and that's not a bad idea. Perhaps I'll have a Pacific War shed at the new house whenever we buy it. Mo says the tray dividers, that might help, but I'm not sure it's going to help in this particular case. It's really going to require me to figure it all out yet. I'm not sure I have done that so far. So let me talk about what's headed up. So every day this week, and there's so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we have unboxing videos already edited, filmed, uploaded, all that stuff scheduled. There should be one on Friday and Saturday as well. Also tomorrow we have the stream with Dan. That's, I believe, on this channel. Let me verify that because I forgot because I'm a dope. I think that's here this week. I will tell you whether that's here this week or not, but I'm pretty sure that's here this week. That is, in fact, here this week. So on this channel, 7:30 p.m. tomorrow, we'll be with Dan. We'll be talking about something, possibly hookers and blow. It could happen. It has happened before. And then we have the unboxing series. I wanted to get an RPG video out this week, but I knew that I was going to have this massive unbox fest coming. So there's going to be at least 2 more of those that will get edited at some point tomorrow in my copious free time. So let's see. Tabletop Edge got Hakapala in 3 counter trays and fits in the box. That's TSWW. Yeah, that's a smaller one though, and it's a huge box. Welcome back, Doug. Thanks for stopping by. Singapore, I think, honestly, even Singapore, which doesn't have that many counters, but the amount of map space in it is absurd. I wouldn't bother trying to organize that in the box. We will be talking about, we will be getting a storage video out of Under an Iron Sky, though, and we'll see what that looks like when I'm done with it. Right now, I'm not done with it. Right now, it's going into GMT trays, because I got stacks of these sitting around. So we're good. Anything else I want to answer here tonight? Mike Macheski, how do I store non-mounted maps that doesn't involve filing it back up? If you mean folding it back up, I just fold them back up. I don't think it's generally a problem. There are some types of map printing where the ink can flake along the edges. Then maybe it's a problem. But I think the fact is that in order to store your maps flat properly, you basically need a cabinet in which to store them, unless you just have a small number of maps, in which case you can actually get an artist's portfolio that will fit it. And you can do that, but I've got too many games to do that. To me, that's not practical. We have already done, John, the One Ring 2nd edition, so check those videos out if you need to see those. The Racina trays, yeah, those will actually fit. But I actually have an alternate solution that I want to work on that's going to be a lot easier for people to find than the Racina trays. So we'll see if it works. It's still in progress. And now I have diverted from Under an Iron Sky, and I got to finish Pacific War because I don't want to leave it half-clipped. So, all right. So I want to thank everybody for stopping by. Where did we top out this week? At 128, which is great. I will also mention, and I keep forgetting to say this, chances are really good we're going to hit 5,000 subscribers in April. And when we do, there will be giveaways. I don't know how I'm going to handle that yet. I don't know what's going to get giveaway, but there'll be giveaways at some point when that happens. The thing I'm signed up to says around April 20th. Sometimes they're nuts. And they're just guessing, right? So subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Please do give the video a thumbs up. Please do consider becoming a patron of Ardwulf's Lair. There's a link in the video description to do that. That is much appreciated. And, you can do that for as little as $1. Greatly appreciated. Everybody that is a patron gets thanked. Their name comes up in the any unboxing or unboxing like video I do. I put that patron card up. So once again, I would like to thank everybody. I would like to apologize to all those whose names I mispronounced. We'll see hopefully a bunch of you tomorrow on the stream with Dan, which I will get scheduled tomorrow once we have a topic. And we'll see. And remember, as I said it already, but I want to say it again. Next Monday's stream is not happening on Monday. It is happening on the following Friday instead, the 25th. Nutball, thank you so much for subscribing. It is greatly appreciated. Large monitors help a lot with Vassal. Large high-resolution monitors help a lot with Vassal. So once again, next Monday's stream ordinarily would be on the 21st. I will be in Seattle. It will be happening on the 25th instead. And in fact, we are not getting home until like midnight. So on Monday. And I got to go to work on Tuesday. I don't know what I was thinking, but I guess I have enough flexibility that I can decide I'm going to start working at 10 a.m. if it comes to that. Once again, thanks everybody for stopping by. We had a great time once again. We've got a whole lot of clipping yet to do, and you can see I've got probably the next several months of games to clip set up right here. So I would like to say thanks everybody, and